We're back after that quickest of quick breaks here on AM 1700 WRCR Haverstraw, WRCR.com. And joining us now, as she does as usual on this Monday morning and every Monday morning, it's Tina Traster. She is the publisher and editor and very trustworthy person behind RCBizJournal.com. Good morning, Tina. How are you?
I like that.
Good morning. Thank you for stroking my ego. I like that.
We do what we can a little bit around here.
We want to make sure everyone's clear, everyone's on the same page, you know.
I hear you. Thank you, gentlemen. All right, so I want to talk about what was, I guess, much talked about last week, but I have some things I want to say about it before we put the issue to bed. So we all know that the case against the Hi-Tor president, Debbie DiBernardo, the kitten case, as I called it, was dropped, and that Debbie DiBernardo got to clear her name and resume her life. I want to talk about this dismissal on this case, because this case all along had many people scratching their heads, wondering how this ever could have come to be. We were talking about here a volunteer who, for the last 6 years, had donated thousands of hours of public service to a nonprofit, who was criminally charged for, let's call it paperwork error, that didn't cost any town anything or anyone anything, that did not enrich her, that had absolutely, no motive. But the worst of it all really is the cost to the animals. I can tell you that, of course, Debbie, personally, her life was turned upside down for a year, and for her personally, this those headlines will live out there forever. But it also cost the shelter, and Hi-Tor Animal Shelter is the only one that we have here in the county, and there are some 300 animals in that shelter right now. And with this black cloud having hung over her and the shelter for a year, there were true life consequences. Did you want to say something?
No, I didn't say anything.
Okay, no, I thought okay. Yeah, so there were true life consequences to this. We know, because we reported several times, that donations dried up, that Hi-Tor's reputation was irreparably harmed, and also resources that would have been used to help the homeless animals were diverted to this lawsuit, and also to having to fight back from this sort of reputational damage. This is, I think it's a real black eye on Rockland County. I know, I've lived here nearly 2 decades now, and I know that we really prize our nonprofits. We all treat them, as something that's very special. We have an awful lot of nonprofits in this county. Hi-Tor's a nonprofit. It may be on county land, and it may contract with towns, as many nonprofits do here in the county. But it's treated. It just and granted, it has its share of chaos and its disadvantages. But I can't think of another nonprofit that ended up in the crosshairs of a criminal prosecution of a volunteer, at least not in the time that I've lived here. If there's a caller out there who wants to correct the record, let me know. But I can't. This just seemed extremely a singular event, and one that we need to take stock and ask, how did this happen? And I would say, to make sure this doesn't happen again, because one thing that comes up here is the notion of the chill effect. If a nonprofit volunteer can end up charged for paperwork, then everybody who's taking leadership roles in nonprofits is going to step back and say, well, I don't want to end up like that.
Do you think this will affect their workforce in the future?
Well, let's talk about what the future is, or what the future might look like. There's, now we move from black cloud to gigantic question mark. I mean, there still remains a gigantic question mark as to what is going to happen going forward. What we know is this. We know that Hi-Tor is our only shelter. We know that we've had a missed opportunity to rebuild the shelter, and that the $500,000 that taxpayers have spent for now has been for naught. We know that Rockland Green, led by Howard Phillips, wants to build a new shelter and be in charge of the animals. If and when such a shelter is to be built, who knows? I mean, right now, Phillips has discussed publicly that he's trying to buy a $4 million building near the Joint Sewage Authority in the town of Haverstraw. What's very striking about Rockland Green and its efforts is this. It is the responsibility of the supervisors to house animals, and they if they want an alternative to Hi-Tor, then I suppose they need to create something. But all along, as this has gone on, up to the point now where we hear that they're trying to buy a $4.2 million building on Beach Road, what's never been presented is a plan. When Rockland Green came to the county and asked for a change in its to amend its charter so that it can be in control of the animals in the county, nothing concrete has ever been presented. No forecasts, no budgets, no projections, no operating plans, nothing has been put in writing, at least as far as anybody knows. These plans, projections, have been asked for in many, many different forms, but as far as I know, and again, if I'm incorrect and there's a detailed plan out there, I would love to see it. But as far as we know, there's no plan. It just seems that the idea is on the table for the supervisors to take control of a new animal shelter, and that after a look around in the county, this privately owned warehouse built on spec is the building that has become the focus. On a parallel track, okay, and this is more important, I think, because this is actually, more real, which is that Hi-Tor is still the only place that is dealing with our homeless and abandoned animals. It needs people to step back up. People need to volunteer. They need to donate, and most of all, they need to start adopting out. Go and adopt animals. So that they can winnow down the number of animals in that shelter. Mm-hmm.
Do you know how many currently offhand are in the shelter?
About 300 animals, which is just, it makes me gasp. Mm-hmm. Because if you've ever been there, we all know that it cannot handle that volume. The new shelter that was planned, might have been able to handle it and handle it humanely, but that is now off the table. The show, the way Hi-Tor has operated for the last 5 years has been that they have contracted with the county, and the towns have paid the county. Moving into the end of December, there is still no signed contract going forward, but de facto, Hi-Tor is still going to be the only game in town. It's going to be where at least 4 of the 5 towns are still going to be bringing its animals, unless something has changed dramatically, since last week. And there's no contract in place, so that leaves this kind of vagary. There's nothing but vagary surrounding Rockland Green's plan. And I want to raise one more important point, which is, and then if you want to ask me some questions. But one more really important point is that Rockland Green is supposed to, they have a whole series of protocols, and they are supposed to put out an RFP for a vendor to run their alleged or their so-called future shelter. And of course, that's also ways away because we don't really know where we're at with that. However, on multiple occasions, Mr. Phillips has announced that the operator for the shelter is going to be the Hudson Valley Humane Society. Now, again, this announcement has been made without formally going out for an RFP to solicit, other potential operators. So, the prosecution, to go back to the beginning of Debbie DiBernardo, was one of the things that has kicked off an unbelievable amount of chaos around this issue. And I think we have a chance here to regroup as a county and to figure out what is the best way forward. I mean, if the supervisors through Rockland Green agree to buy a $4.2 million building, it doesn't stop there. This is a windowless warehouse that would need to be completely refurbished to make it suitable for a shelter. Not to mention the environmental issues around the building, which we can talk about at another time. But in terms of monies, everybody balked over the cost that it was going to take, and the legislators tabled the funding. But right now, what we know is that municipal bond rates have basically doubled since the county pulled this project, and that the building itself, this warehouse building built on spec, is not it's not like a let's open up the door and here's the shelter. I mean, it would have so much rehabbing that would need to be done. So what will it ultimately cost when it's all said and done? We don't know, because we haven't seen any financial projections on how this is going to work and how salaries are going to work, what this is ultimately going to cost the taxpayers. So I think we have, a very problematic situation here, and I think that all 5 supervisors, need to be, asked straight out, what is the specific plan? It's not enough to just to kind of like deflect and say, well, that's Rockland Green, or that's, all the supervisors sit on the Rockland Green board. At least 2 supervisors, I would say, were vocal about, criticizing Hi-Tor all through when the suit, when the prosecution was kind of hanging over Ms. DiBernardo's head. It was a constant drumbeat of, it's under criminal investigation. It's not. Maybe it never should have been. But the question is, where is the accountability for how we're going to deal with our animals in this county moving forward? I mean, I think that we have a lot of questions here around accountability, and they're not really aimed at Hi-Tor at all. They're aimed at all of the other players who are, kind of trying to figure out or not really figure out what to do here. I mean, I've said this before, and I'll say it again. And in the ideal world, if a nonprofit that runs an animal shelter is not dependent necessarily on the county, or the town, then they're able to get out from under the politics that shelters often become the subject of, and that might be. That might be a wish list item for on someone's Christmas list, but it'd be a hard transformation, not impossible. But when animal shelters become the subject of politics, we see it, and it's not unique, by the way, to this county, but we do see how problematic it gets. And finally, in this case, the cost to Debbie DiBernardo, the cost to people close to her, and most of all, the cost to the animals. In the end of the day, this really harmed the animals. The conditions they live in, the care that they're able to receive. I mean, shelters need money, and if their reputations are bashed, then they're at a disadvantage, a very big disadvantage. One last. Honestly, this is the last comment, is while this was going on, Ms. DiBernardo felt that she was not able to, because of this suit was hanging over her head, she felt all along that she couldn't combat all of the things that were being said she couldn't fight back to what was being said in public, and that's because she was too afraid for her life, because she didn't know which way this whole trial would go. But she had a really solid attorney, Gerard Damiani, and she, again, shout out to her, because I don't know too many people who would have been able to withstand the fear and who would have stood fast and had the fortitude to not take the multiple pleas that were offered to her. The prosecutor came at her so many times, with a plea deal. Oh, this is the last plea deal. But there was always another plea deal right down to the 11th hour. And she managed to stand firm. She knew she was innocent. She knew this was a suit that made no sense. She had a good attorney, thank goodness for her. But there's so much work to be done right now, and it would be so great if this county could pull it together and move in a positive direction.
I suppose I know we don't have a lot of time, but if you wouldn't mind, I do have a question regarding what you were speaking on earlier when you say that this is an opportunity to regroup and sort of reevaluate what the county plans on doing, at least through Rockland Green, when it comes to the shelter. I was wondering if you could clarify what exactly you would mean by that, because as the Haverstraw supervisor, Howard Phillips, has been putting it, this kind of sounds like a done deal. I mean, I know there's not a lot of information on a plan right now, but what they do plan on taking it over. It does seem like at least everything the way he speaks about it is very finite, is very final. So what would you mean by regrouping and reevaluating? What would you recommend to people that want to do that?
Yeah. Okay. So it's not a done deal. Because it's not a done deal until, I suppose, they buy a property, and I don't know what taxpayers will think about that. So it's not a done deal. It's not a done deal at all. And as I said before, Hi-Tor, de facto is the only game in town right now. Possible directions. Okay, possible directions for Hi-Tor. Hi-Tor should probably rebrand itself. In the ideal world, if there were any philanthropists or somebody out there that could donate a suitable building or a suitable site that makes sense, that is off the county land, that could be an avenue for rebuilding a shelter somewhere, and for Hi-Tor, or whatever its rebranded name is, to essentially, pick up from where it's at, and it has to rebuild. It has to rebuild its reputation. It has to rebuild its brand. But more importantly, it has to rebuild its structure. And they are working right now to put more skilled people, to get more skilled people in their camp, so that they can evolve from the organization that they've been to one that becomes much more professional and much more capable of operating without all the chaos that's come along with it for many, many years. I believe, this is what I believe. I believe that it's not a done deal with Rockland Green, and that, the supervisors, right now they're all in lockstep. But I believe that, this is still a fluid situation, and that if somehow, Hi-Tor could become, can rebuild itself in a way that is more self-sustaining and more about philanthropy and more of these great shelters that have nonprofit models. And here's the thing: is that if Hi-Tor does this, the supervisors will have no reason to complain about sending, the animals from their town to such a facility or under the auspices of such a nonprofit that's functioning better. The onus is on Hi-Tor to become a better organization, for sure. I mean, it was not a criminal situation, but it does need to become a better organization with more skilled people leading it into the future in order for it to survive and become the place that people continue to rely on. If it does not do that, however, then yes, Rockland Green will fill that void. Rockland Green wants control. They want control for reasons that many people don't understand. But they'll only be able to, I believe that they won't have, they'll be at a disadvantage if Hi-Tor rebuilds itself into a strong shelter that is probably in a new building and that is run by new blood. And this is what I'm saying about Rockland County regrouping is we don't have to throw out the baby with the bathwater here. We have a volunteer organization. We have an organization that will certainly not cost as much to taxpayers as it will if it's run under Rockland Green. We wouldn't know, of course, because we haven't seen budget projections, but one can safely say that that is the case, that there will be, salaries there, that it'll be a much more expensive proposition to run a shelter that gets built, and bought by the supervisors, than if Hi-Tor can find its way through a really massive redo. I mean, it really does need to completely rethink what it is, how it operates, who's leading it, the skills, all the things that have been missing, an executive director, a fundraiser. I mean, the organization needs to be professionalized, or Rockland Green will fill the vacuum. But I believe if it does become professionalized, if there is, a real push to keep it going, ultimately, I think that the people of Rockland County will probably be ahead of the game here, because I believe that ultimately it will be less burdensome on the taxpayers than if this becomes I don't know, if this becomes part of a public authority. It's a whole different tax structure. It's a whole different it's set of circumstances. It's a different employment. Everything will look very different, and then we'll look back and we'll say, you know what? We could have had this could have gone a whole different way. But people need to engage on this issue. It's a really important issue. I mean, I can't think of anybody, generally speaking, who doesn't love animals or doesn't like animals. Whether it's a dog, whether it's a cat, maybe it's a bird, maybe it's a hamster. I mean, we're rabbit. We all have. If we're human, most of us, if we're human, we have some connection or affection to animals. And even if we're not, we can appreciate, just like with any other nonprofit that we support, just because we're human. In Rockland County, the animals have a right to live in a humane situation. That can happen if Hi-Tor can step up and reinvent itself. It can't happen if Hi-Tor just continues to trudge along at that county building over in Pomona. It needs a 2.0, and I think that I know there are more people who are interested, who have watched what has gone on for the last year, who are upset about this situation. And who, may not just, stand by with some inevitability of the warehouse in Haverstraw becoming the new home to the animals in the county. But we'll see.
I'm sorry. Indeed, we will. And anybody out there right now, if anybody wants to take the load off of those 300 animals at the shelter, we definitely urge you to look up some more information on adopting, maybe even just fostering. It'll definitely help them out there. And we all wish for a beneficial outcome for the animals at the end of the day. Tina, thank you so much for joining us. If anybody wants any more information on the Rockland County Business Journal, check them out at RCBiz, that's B-I-Z, rcbizjournal.com. Thank you so much, Tina. Have a great week, and we will talk to you next week.
Awesome. You too. Bye.